Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel for another rabbit stick video. In this one we are going to make this set of 3 number 7 or Wirlki style rabbit sticks. Now, rabbit sticks are a worldwide technology. We've talked about the basic overview of the distribution of this hunting tool, different styles of it, the construction techniques, all of the concepts in a series on these tools. And if you want to start at the beginning of the series, link at the top of the screen to the initial intro, and then the end screens will lead you all the way through that series. This is an addendum to it because these number 7s are a really interesting style, and I've wanted to make one of these since I started learning this technology, but it's not just that simple. You don't just decide what style of rabbit stick you're going to make. You find a branch that can make a rabbit stick, and the shape of that branch dictates the style. So you don't just decide to go make a number 7. You have to go find a number 7 in the raw, and then carve it out and get the stick that you want. Now, this one, it was about in this orientation. This was a tree branch. So the tree that grew this is still perfectly happy growing along our driveway, but this branch was coming down and sagging and hitting our cars when we were going up and down the driveway, so it needed pruned. And it had this curve in the main beam of the branch, and then this little beak coming up was a side branch. Okay? So this is hophorn beam, the wood that I'm using. It's a very slow-growing tree. These are the 2 cutoffs from the stick that I used. I was just sitting and counting, and this has about 27 growth rings in it, in that fairly small piece of branch. And then this was the cutoff from the side branch that made the beak of the number 7, and this has 18 growth rings in it. So these heavy hard woods most often take a long time to grow. So we want to respect those resources, use them wisely, prune with good pruning cuts, and harvest in a way that's not just going to wipe out the population. And then all of my offcuts from this stuff I keep for other projects, right? Like that has a tool handle at least in it yet. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be something. So once you've collected it and dried it, keep these extra pieces and you'll find things to do with them. So what's interesting about this? Well, for one thing, it's a very stable and very powerful style of rabbit stick. All of this weight, it's thrown in this direction, okay? So all of the weight of this beak is inertia going with the striking end. When I was tuning the first of these 3, and all 3 of these did come from the same piece, as I was tuning the first of these 3, I had a misthrow and put it into a spruce tree, and it cut through a spruce branch about the size of my pinky and kept on going for another 20 feet after having done so. So they have a lot of driving force, and this is the style that was traditionally used in Australia for hunting emu. Okay, so this was used for larger critters. That's one of the things that I was interested in. Another thing I was interested in actually, making one of these, is some of the stories that went with it from the early colonizers, writing about them being used specifically in conflict with people that had shields. And a lot of these references would talk about this beak getting caught in the shield. And it's like, my brain was looking at them and saying, that doesn't make any sense. It's going to come, it's going to strike this way, and the beak is the trailing edge. But what I've discovered in throwing them is that when they start to lose balance, because that beak has so much back weighting, it tends to whip in and do this, which then could carry around and cause, chaos and swatting and disorder somebody that was attacking you. So I mentioned that I don't make weapons on this channel, not for use against people. Hunting implements, fishing stuff, yes, of course. That's part of subsistence, but not anything of, like, we'll say military intent. But I was interested in the dynamics of it, how those stories could square with what I was seeing. And it does have very interesting dynamics. And in terms of hunting, these you do want to know that back weighting has a different sort of dynamic than most rabbit sticks because it affects how you tune. When you tune these, they need to be tuned with a leading edge profile that's much closer to lenticular and has less lift than other styles of rabbit stick because of that tendency to flip over. Okay? So they do work a little bit different. The third thing that I was interested in learning about this style is that, again, a lot of the early reports talked about these being fairly specialized and mostly used against, in addition to emu, small flocks of birds. Again, my brain was thinking, well, why? Why is that going to be a thing? But one of the interesting factors that you have to recognize in most rabbit stick designs, and pretend the beak isn't here at the moment, it just goes to my hand, that the center of gravity is about here. And the center of rotation is about there. So the stick actually rotates around a point of space which is not contained within the stick itself. So, if you're throwing this at a small target, right, it can actually rotate around the target. So you can be absolutely straight, direct on, and still miss the rabbit or the bird because the stick just rotates around it because the center of rotation is outside of the stick itself. Okay? But when I started making these, the center of gravity is a lot farther forward. Not quite as much on this one. Definitely more on this one. Yeah, right about there. Okay, so center of gravity is here instead of most rabbit sticks where it's right at the bend. Again, that's because of the different weighting in this beak. Okay? So because the center of gravity is moved farther forward, instead of rotating around a point that's about here, it's rotating around a point that's about here. So much more of the flight path of the stick is actually occupied by the stick. So it's a lot harder to have a perfect dead-on throw and still miss your target because the presence of this beak moves that forward. So it absolutely is a better hunting tool. The style is a better hunting tool for small targets. Okay? Whether that's, a flock of parakeets or the small diameter legs of an emu. You're much more likely to actually hit the target, and then because of the beak, you have that driving force. Okay? So those are two things that I would have never really put together without actually making it and throwing it. And that's a very good argument for, experimental archaeology and anthropology. You got to make stuff and work with it to really understand the tool that you're using. Okay? And then the fourth thing that I really like about this design is just simply the fact that it has a hook. Because if you've ever been actually foraging and gathering in a real forest situation, there's always that thing that's just there. And sometimes you can jump up and grab it and pull the branch down, sometimes you can't. But this being able to go up and hook and pull a branch down is actually a huge asset if you're collecting berries and nuts in the forest, right? It really is, a tremendously useful thing to be able to, have a tool that can reach out and pull a branch down. Or if you just got a rabbit and it, flopped into the bushes to reach in and pull that food item out of the bush without sticking your hands in the poison ivy or sticking your hands in the multiflora rose or sticking your hands in the hawthorn thicket. If you have something like this that you can stick in and pull it out, it actually is a remarkably useful tool, independent of its ability to be used as a game harvesting device in and of itself. So those are the four reasons that I was kind of fascinated by this design and wanted to work with them. And after years of looking, found the lovely branch that these pieces came from. We make this one initially, and this took a lot of work to tuning, and I did use some steam bending in the tuning of this piece. So that's new to this video that I didn't have in the preceding videos on rabbit sticks. And once this was made, and I had an idea for how this design in general terms was going to perform, then we took the rest of it, split the remainder of the blank into 2 additional pieces, and made a set of 3 out of 1 stick. I did use some modern tools, but as you'll see as we go through, I was able to get this 3rd throwing stick out of that blank because of the modern tools, right? The preceding videos in this series, it was all traditional tools. I like to do that because I like to boil things down to the simplest possible form to have the barrier to entry as low as humanly possible for these skills. But in this one, having and using some modern tools gave me 3 finished products instead of the 2 finished products that I would have been able to achieve using only, simple traditional tools. So I did that. These blanks are not easy to find, so I got my 3rd stick. Along the way, we look at where there is a little side diversion where we talk about tuning another stick that I was working on at the same time. But the main focus is on these number 7s. And the last thing I'll say before we dig in is that this project kept getting pushed aside. I started this in April, and it's now August when I'm finishing it up. So you'll see some change in the seasons. No, it doesn't normally take 6 months to make a throwing stick. However, this kind of, I get a little done and then get delayed for 2 weeks. And I get a little done and then get delayed for 2 weeks just because of life. So that's why there's so much change in the seasons as we go through this video. There's not nearly that much work in an individual rabbit stick that you couldn't, get it done or mostly done on a weekend, right? But this, for some reason, this project just dropped. So if you want to learn some more about this really fascinating style of throwing stick, come join in and we'll dig right into the project. I've wanted to experiment with the number 7 boomerang for a long time because in terms of something that I would actually want to carry in a primitive bushcraft or camping setting, this would be the one, because having this hook attached to it is tremendously useful, for reaching up into trees, pulling down limbs that might have fruit you want to pick on them, pulling down kindling, reaching and grabbing at stuff, grabbing at fishing nets in a stream, right? Having something with a hook on it is extraordinarily useful in ways that you might not think of until you've actually gone out into the woods and tried to gather something, right? So I'm really excited to have this blank. This is hop hornbeam, which is one of the absolute hardest, densest woods that we have available here in the mid-Atlantic region. This, the locust, both black and honey locust are good. The harder end of sugar maple, the harder end of white oak, Osage orange would be the top of the top in our climate zone, and serviceberry, right? Those are the super hard woods to work with, heavy woods. So it's one of the best woods, and it's the best of the common woods. Okay, so this is a great blank. I want to get the most out of it. Now, before I start cutting into this, I want to talk about a couple things. Well, I want to talk about design. When I cut this, when I harvested this, you can see all the ends are painted. That keeps checks down, but they're still checks. So if you look at this, I left all of the branch stubs long, and I cut off all of these ends where there's a crotch. Okay? Most of the time, the checks won't penetrate through the crotch and go deeper. Okay? And then this end, I just left ghastly long. So I want to think about boomerang design a little bit. So this is the boomerang that I made on the channel here a while back in the non-returning boomerang series. And it's a little on the small side. This one is a little on the large side. So, kind of this is sort of the common range. And what these have in common is they're about a cubit, right? They're about fingertip to armpit, right? That's fingertip to armpit and kind of a stretch. This one is fingertip to arm, is, you know, palm of the base of the hand to armpit. Okay? So that's kind of your range. For the actual hunting boomerangs, both historic and present, they're all in sort of this about as long as your arm range. It can be a little bit of a stretch out to reach the tip or go a little past, and it can be a little bit shorter. Some are just kind of forearm to fingertip length, some of the really small ones, but that would be more of like a kid's practice toy than something you would actually hunt with. And that really is a sweet spot. It's light enough to throw easily and repeatedly. It is heavy enough to strike a real smart blow when it hits the rabbit you're hunting. And anything longer than this that's roughly boomerang shaped is some sort of swung club. Okay? It's no longer a true long distance throwing weapon. Longer than your arm, and you're getting into, or much longer than your arm, and you're getting to really hard to throw with control territory. So I am going to design this off of the larger of the two. This one worked out really, really well. We just went from donkeys being extra at the barn to cats being extra trying to climb up the tripod. Farm life. I love it. Anyway, this one does want to soar and veer a little bit at the end of its flight. And that's because this is ash, which is on the lower density end of the spectrum. Ash isn't really heavy, hard, strong enough to be an ideal non-returning boomerang rabbit stick wood choice. Okay, but it's a good starter design. Now, to mark out this blank, okay, I want to think about, it's going to be down in here somewhere, so I want to think about coming up and having the projection be about the same length as the bend in the boomerang is deep. Okay, so right around here, I want to come up and make a mark. Okay? And then, again, because I left this so long, I want to get, sort of an approximate length. And I will leave both of these a little bit long. But I know I'm going to cut out a lot of this, so I'm not going to push this all the way to the end to measure. But, if we go in here and then make a mark here, that will give us a place to start from there to there, okay? And then all of my checking will be in these extra pieces. And this is such an amazing wood to do, little random projects in. I'm absolutely going to keep this stub, right? This is a 2 year, or
1 year.
one full year seasoned piece of hop horn beam, and that's nothing to sneer at, right? So this cutoff and this cutoff will go on the project pile. They're not going to be discarded because this is an amazing wood choice. So the first step is going to be cut that off, and then the next step in the processing is going to be cut it down with a handsaw, okay? You can see our little putty friend there. This is the other half of this throw stick, okay? So it is my hope and intent to make a nice matched pair out of both sides of this. But you can see, I've cut it down to length, then I ripped it, and I split out a little bit here. But then again, there was a big, gnarly, nasty knob here on the end that I also cut off and cheated and used a power saw on that cut because I could. So, cut it down so that you have to do the least amount of handsaw work. But this wood, this is true of so many of these really heavy woods. There's exceptions, like black locust splits very, very well, and I should have put hickory on my list and forgot it there for a minute, and that splits really, really well, as does white oak. But these tend to not split well when they're in crooks, even if it is a wood that splits well otherwise, because you get real gnarly grain in here. And if you look at this piece, if you see these undulations, high spot, low spot, high spot, low spot, high spot, low spot, that's a sign of twisted grain. So if I go into this with a wedge and try to split it, I'm probably going to get splinters and kindling and lose my blank. So even though the splitting this is going to be an hour or multi-hour pain in the neck, it's still worth doing correctly with a handsaw, because I want a match set of throw sticks out of this, and this is not a material that I can... Did some work on this. Didn't go quite as planned, but I want to talk about that too, so I'm going to show you everything that we did here. It's still good. We can still use a piece here. Now, the first thing I did was to make a cut down through here to get past all of this gnarly, knotty stuff, and in the end, to try and keep this centered in the piece. But this interlock grain is a pain, right? You can see all of the wave here in this. It started to pinch the saw, and it was just pretty impossible to keep cutting any farther. So I split it. And this is kind of funny, right? Even though I cut all of this, when I started splitting it by driving an axe in right here, it popped out and left that cut there. That's how wonky the grain was. And then it ran to the surface, which is a thing that happens in splits when they get off too close to one side. They'll just keep running along the surface. Now, I still got a usable piece out of this. So I put this up here. It's almost flat. Well, this section is flat, and then this kind of kicks up a little bit. And if I compare it to this, it's certainly long enough. And when I measure the thickness through here with this little caliper, even in a low spot, it's 3/4 inch, okay? Now my thickness here is about exactly a 1/2 inch, okay? So I have a 1/4 inch to work with, so that's plenty of material. Now, this is going to have to be worked in this attitude, but this is the top and this is the bottom, which means that this kick is in the wrong direction. That's just about the right amount of kick if this was to be the flat bottom, but it's backwards. So we may need to steam bend this. We'll see how it goes. But I'm going to leave this piece aside, prepare this as a prototype, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about layout here. I just kind of used my 3 fingers as a gauge. I'm going to even the edge off, so I'm not going to put them all the way to the edge, and make a mark. Now, I want to accentuate this curve as much as possible. You can see here it's curved to a lesser degree than this example piece. And the originals often are that way. The number 7s don't seem to be curved quite as much. But I still want to accentuate that curve. So I'm going to cut and leave as much here as I can there on the middle piece. And then on the end, we're going to favor this side. So we'll make a mark here. And then we'll just carve this in a straight line there. And here we'll take out a bit of that belly. Now this is very hard, this fresh split surface is very hard to draw on evenly, but you can kind of see what I'm going to be going for there. So this is going to be all draw knife work. I have enough material to do the project and to have a good chance of making a decent prototype, but I don't have any extra. So I'm going to do this very, very carefully. I'm not going to chop this out with a hatchet. I'm going to go right to the draw knife. I'll cut in these profiles and make it as thin as possible in width, so that I don't have as much to worry about flattening, and then I'm only flattening in exactly the spots that I really need to. Once I get that worked in and figure out what would I have to remove and what I don't, then we'll see what this looks like and how much of a rock there is here. Okay, we'll see how that comes out after I'm done the basic flattening and what I need to do with this, because this can be dead flat or it can be tipped up in the ends of the wings, but it can't be down. That's a negative lift, and that won't work. And it does have to be thrown in this direction. If I could use this surface as the bottom, I wouldn't have any worries at all. So I'm just going to get in, start whittling on this, and we'll see what we come up with. We have the blank with most of the width removed. Now, I think it's going to be a really nice piece. It's interesting, there's this inner core of absolutely dead straight grain. It kind of runs off here a little bit, but then the next layer wraps all the way and goes all the way to the front. So it's not severe runoff. I think it'll be okay. But it's interesting that this branch, and this is a branch off a tree that is still very much alive. It's interesting that it made that dead straight initial couple years of growth and then got all of this gnarly, muscly, knotty growth on the outside of that after the fact. Just interesting growth pattern. But interlocking grain will be very strong for this sort of tool. Now, when I trimmed the sides, a lot of the wood that was making me think that there was a big belly here went away. There still is a bit of a kick this way, but I think I have enough thickness in the right places that I can get rid of at least most of it with carving rather than steam bending. I would rather carve it to shape than steam bend it, because steam bending will come undone over time. Not quickly, but it will come undone over time. Which is why, you don't ever really want to get, besides the ethical issues of exporting somebody else's cultural patrimony, you don't want to get like an old, 100-year-old hunting boomerang from Australia and throw it and think that you're seeing how it performed when it was a baby. Because over time, those are traditionally tuned by heat bending, and over time those bends come out. Okay, so what it does, something made in the 20s for optimum performance probably won't throw for beans today. The bends will look similar to the way they did, but they will no longer act the right way, and a steam bent tool has to be regularly readjusted. Okay, so if I can carve this instead of bend it, I'm happier. I think I can. At least I can get most of it that way. Now, I'm really interested to play with this. In the original video, I talk about the boomerang test, where it should be able to balance on its curve and hold itself up. And if you hold it tip to tip, it should be able to, sag the other way. And that gives you enough of a tilt, enough of a belly here to tilt it down and stabilize its flight. This is the straightest stick that I've ever been able to successfully tune. And if you look at this, you can see this is the one I'm working with now. Does not have, it's a much straighter in this bend than this one, than the red one. Okay? But when I compare what I'm looking at here to historic photos of, these Wirlki style sticks, this is more crooked than a lot of them. So I think that this beak coming back is the stabilizer for this design. And I'm really interested to see how it performs. If I, do this with it, it will kind of balance this way. Not as much as I wish. It'll be interesting to see how I have to tune it here. I might need to remove some material here to readjust those things. But it won't balance this way at all. There's just no balance point. So I'm really interested to see how this works, tunes, and what we can learn from this prototype. And then whatever we learn from this prototype, I have plenty of wood to make at least one more attempt if this does not go well. Okay? So the next step in this is to smooth, to take these big knobs off. And some of that I am going to do with the hatchet hewing. And I will do this standing up in a different location, but very slowly. See, I'm not going for large chunks of wood. Okay? It might be easier to do some of that this way. There's a log pile that way that will I can lean this against a log and have it much better supported than what I'm doing here. And then we'll do the same with these knobs. We'll just cut those off with the hatchet, and that goes fairly quickly. This horn beam is crazy hard wood, so it's not going to hew like pine no matter what you do and no matter how sharp that is. It's slow going, and I do like doing this where I have one log here and then another here that I can support it on that way. You can get a lot more force into the blow. So I'm going to go work on this, get it as flat as we can, and then the stick will tell us what the next step is. About ready to start tuning with this boomerang, and I'm also going to simultaneously talk about tuning on this one. So we'll have our prototype number 7, see how this goes, and this one is the twin of the boomerang that I cut out of a ironwood root in the previous video series on making boomerangs, right? So this one I already kind of have a model of one that works really well. That's literally the other half of the root, right? So this was growing in about that position, with this being the trunk and this being the root kind of angling downhill. Okay, so the other half of the root's has already boomeranged. So but I wanted to tune this on the video here as another chance to talk about tuning strategies and different pieces, because this is one of the points that I think is really lacking on YouTube at the moment, is substantive content on tuning. So we'll take him along for the ride. Could you hold that for a second, honey?
Sure.
Thanks. But I want to talk about this one first. This is how it will be thrown, with this rotating in that direction. Okay, so leading edge, trailing edge, trailing edge. Okay. The balance point is right about there. Okay. So from here out is leading edge, and then from here back is trailing edge. This, I was able to cut it fairly close to flat, but not perfectly flat. Okay, so I'm not sure how well this is all going to pick up. As you can see, the tail kicks up that way, and then there's a little bit of a down knuckle here, and then it goes up, 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 up. This is the high point, and then it kind of comes down to this lump, right? That is exactly opposite what you want. Because this is the bottom face, you want the tips to tip up, to curve up, not to have the middle up and the tips down. When the tips are up, that's positive lift. When the tips are down, that's negative lift. So I have a profile here, and I cut the same profiles for my first guest profiles in this as I did in the previous boomerang series. But it's it's roughly plano convex, so the bottom is flat-ish, the top is domed, okay? And then on the trailing edge, that edge is raised up higher, so it's kind of closer to lenticular here. The edge is closer to the top, and then where I want more lift, the edge is closer to the bottom. So I have a lift-generating profile, but at the same time, because my tips are down, that's negative lift, right? So this, also here we have to look at the tip on this one, which is angling down, okay? You want this to angle up, because that's on the trailing edge, so that wants to also angle up relative to this mass to act as a control surface, okay? So we have just about the right degree of curve in all of the wrong directions. Now if I look at this one, can you hand me that, beloved? Then maybe take the putty cat somewhere. If I look at this one, you can see the central mass is low and it rises to the tips, okay? So this is the right shape. I think it's a little bit too thick. When I look at it, it's a little bit closer to lenticular, okay? The bottom wants to be a little bit flatter, okay? and the limbs a little bit thinner. And we'll accomplish that thinning as we flatten the bottom. So that's where we are on these. Black flies. Oh, we're in black fly season now. So I'm going to throw these, and we'll see if how they throw kind of matches my assumptions. I'm only going to get one good throw because the grass is really wet, and when you get one surface very wet and the other very dry, it throws off the balance pretty spectacularly. So we'll get one throw here, and in this little little set, we'll do some tuning, and then we'll move on. So I'm going to throw this one first. Can they see this well, beloved,
yes.
where I'm standing? You can see it's well balanced, but it's not moving very quick, right? It's kind of spinning slowly and moving relatively slowly. That's typical of just having too much drag. They'll throw that way when there's still a square edge. I usually, when I kind of have them almost thickness, I'll go and give them a toss just to see how stable or not stable they are. And they're really, really slow to spin when they still have square edges on them. Then you file it out and they gain a little bit of speed, and then you tune them and you keep gaining speed all the way along. So that lack of speed, generally it's dead straight. It definitely glides. That's not just a clubby thing with a ballistic trajectory. It's definitely got a glide trajectory, but it's moving slow. So it's too much drag. Since it's shaped, the drag is probably coming from too much thickness. How do I know that? By playing with a bunch of these, right? You kind of just gotta, this is one of those things, there's no formula, you just gotta mess with it, give yourself the mental freedom to screw a bunch up and see how it goes. Now let me chuck this one, we'll see how it does. This in frame here, beloved?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A little bit farther.
That wasn't bad though.
That was pretty good, that was pretty good. Gets a little bit farther. Still a little slow. Now, a couple times I've thrown this before, it would want to kind of destabilize a little bit right at the end. This didn't. It just kind of stalled out at the end. And I'm not sure why it didn't destabilize at the end on this particular throw, because it has in the past. Right after I finished carving that, I gave it a couple of chucks. But again, in that one, I have some aspects of its design are giving a positive lift. Other aspects of its design are giving a negative lift, so it's kind of fighting with each other, with itself. Those two parameters are fighting with each other, so it's fighting with itself. So that's the first place I'm going to tackle that one in the tuning series, because the limbs are pretty much the thickness I want, and in a couple of spots a little thinner than I wish they were. So I'm not going to try to gain speed from thinness on that piece. I'm going to try to gain speed from elegance on that piece. And that's going to be a steam bending process. I haven't done that on the channel yet, so I'll show you how I steam bend these. The smaller one with, the simple V design, that one, my first tuning step is just going to be get out the rasp and carve the bottom a little flatter. Now, to do this, I like to have my piece in a pot of boiling water and go for a full boil on that. But now we have to work very, very quickly to do this bend. So we want some clamps that are pretty close to the right size. I'm going to prop up the end of this beak a little bit, clamp that down quickly, and then clamp down here to accomplish the bend. Okay. It's going to be a little tricky to see here in this setup, but I have this block of wood under the tip of this beak, and I'm bending it. This is the direction that it will be thrown with this forward. Okay, that's the leading edge, this is the trailing edge. And now clamped in this position, it's tipping up, okay, instead of tipping down. So I've seen these various ways. Some of these are dead flat. Some I can see a tip up in the back of this beak. And most just photograph it in a way that you can't tell anything about the attitude of that. So I'm making a guess. I'm guessing that this is going to give me better performance if this is tipped up in the back because, as discussed in the previous videos on these rabbit sticks, that is the way you carve the trailing edge when you want to prevent veering and soaring. Okay? So I'm guessing that this will follow that pattern. But I have never made a Wirlki rabbit stick before, so I'm guessing this is a prototype. Now, the good thing about this kind of boiling water, wet, hot bend is that it's very gentle on the wood. We're not scorching, we're not cracking, we're not hardening, we're not changing the characteristics of the wood to any substantial amount, okay? And we're really not asking that much of the bend, okay? We're just bending this from slightly down to slightly up, okay? We're not doing a 90-degree bend or making a big old hoop or anything like that. So if this is too much bend, if this needs to be dead flat, we can straighten it back out. If I get this all put together, it's like, oh, I went totally the wrong direction. I could even bend it back to its natural condition if I wanted, right? We're just doing little small tweaks so we're not overstressing it, okay? So this is the first of these steam bends, right? It's a wet heat. The second is going to be, this tips up on the top, we need it to be down, okay? So we need to go from this position to that position. So we're going to do a little bend in this area, but that's for tomorrow because I want to leave this clamped onto this piece of 2x4 overnight so that it can get completely dry, completely cool. When you unclamp this, it's always going to have some recoil and spring back. Okay, so you always want to bend a little bit further than you think you actually need. The faster you take it out of the clamps, the more it will rebound. And the more you work the piece after bending, the more it will rebound. So if you do this bend early in the tuning process and then do a whole bunch of tuning work on it, you might end up needing to rebend it because most of the shape is being stored in the tension and compression at the surfaces, okay? So it's not going to relax just from sanding it. It will relax a little bit from carving the flutes in the last step, okay? But if I were to do this and then decide, oh, I want to take off an 1/8 inch of material, I would lose a substantial amount of the bend in that, okay? So that's why on this piece, I carved it all to pretty darn close to what I think is going to be the finished thickness before starting the steam bending step. So I'm going to leave this clamped overnight, and then tomorrow night we'll do the second bend, and then we'll get a chance to see how it throws. When you're tuning these things, you want to make a small change and then test. Small change, test. Don't go and change a whole bunch of stuff all at once and then throw it and discover, oh wait, this is a completely different implement and now I've lost track of where I was, right? It's easy to do because when we get very, very close to a finished product, even those teeny tiny changes are going to make a huge impact on how the thing flies, okay? So I've been working on both of these. Here, I'm not sure how well the detail's all going to pick up on film, but I took about 1 1/16 of an inch or so. I didn't measure, I just took a little bit off of both of the wings. I didn't touch the middle. Having a little bit of a blob in the middle here, having some weight either in the middle or on the tip, helps it be a slightly better flywheel, right? Retain energy. So I didn't want to take too much off all at once. So since I removed quite a lot from both wings, I didn't mess with the middle, okay? And then on our Wirlki style, you can see this tip is now dead flat. Is that showing up well, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. This tip piece is now dead flat across the bottom after the steam bend. I had 2 little tiny cracks open up right here and here. They won't matter in the end. I'm not worried about them. But since I own a tube of super glue, I'm probably going to put a little speck of super glue in there just to make extra sure. Okay? Not worried about them though, even if I did not have glue, that's not a problem. Out here, it's just some little checks opening up in that gnarly grain. That happens. There must have been a little bit of core that wasn't 100% dry. And then when I did the heating, it boiled all of that water out really, really quickly. Okay. So just a little spot in the thickest, densest, deepest in part of the stick that wasn't 100% dry. But not a worry, not a worry. So I still left, like I said, one change and then test. I still have this upward belly in this stick. Okay. So with the wingtips pointing down, that's negative lift. And you'll see what changed. I have thrown this a couple times since I bent it. You'll see what having negative lift in the middle of the stick looks like. So I'm going to throw these and do a test. First, can I hand you these, beloved? Thank you. There you go. First, I'm going to throw the finished one for perspective on a good, fully tuned, stable implement. Okay. Now, we'll throw the one in process. This still looks a little thick to my eye. I don't want the wings any further thinned out. Ooh, bad throw. Try to not flub the throw. Okay. You can see it's stable, but it's still not rotating as fast as I really want it to. Okay. I'm going to thin that middle section out a little bit more. That's kind of the last place I have to tweak that. When it's not spinning fast enough, that's usually too much resistance, air resistance, somewhere, right? And the last thick spot is that middle. So I'm going to go again, and I'm going to take a millimeter, 1/16 of an inch or so off of that middle section yet. Okay, maybe a little bit more, and then we'll test it again. And then, because you hand me the Wirlki here, we'll play with this. So again, this is flat, but this is still bent up toward the top in the middle, which is negative lift. Okay, here we go. Okay. So you can see in that throw, it's a lot more of a up and down ballistic trajectory, right? So it has the lift surfaces cut into it, okay? It is a lift generating wing profile with a flat bottom and a dome top, okay? Mm-hmm. But because it has negative lift with the sweep of those wingtips, those two are canceling out, and it's roughly the same as if it was just a flat stick. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do there is, instead of having a bend this way, I'm going to steam bend it so that the wingtips are up. Okay, so I need to take this to this. Okay, then we will have positive lift from the profile of the wingtips and from the plano-convex shape of the wing cross section. Okay, so instead of fighting each other, they will match each other. We're doing our second bend on this rabbit stick blank. Now, when you need to do a bend in the middle, this is just an obnoxious place to try and get the thing hot enough to bend. You're never going to really find a pot deep enough. Flipping the tips is really easy. You can just boil it. It's really soft, it's really easy on the material. But when you need to do a bend here, which is where we need to do a bend here, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in anything, okay? But this is a little trick that will get you that bend. Now, this is kind of similar to the way that they do it in the Pacific Northwest when they're doing bent wood boxes, and you have a big long plank and you're going to bend it in 3 or 4 places along that plank where you cut grooves. They'll do a technique where they put rags across the bends and pour boiling water on it. And they'll pour a kettle of water about every 2 or 3 minutes for 10 or 15 minutes and then fold it up. Here, I have it on top of a kettle of boiling water, and I've draped a number of towels across the top to insulate it, and then there's one over it that's getting wet and is holding that moisture close to the wood. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up, pull these rags off. While I do that, my beloved is going to shift the camera view to here, and I'll show you the clamping. Make sure you have something that you can pull this all up. We need to go quickly over here, get the clamps on as quickly as humanly possible. You always want to do this with the clamps fairly close to your desired thickness. Now, okay, let me get this stuff out of the way. You can actually see what I've done. So instead of this bending up, now it's bent down. Now you notice I put two clamps here. There was a pretty sharp bend right at this location. But that was, can I see this well? Mm-hmm. Okay. But that was also a thin spot where it was going to kind of hinge a little bit. So I didn't want to just put all of the clamping pressure on that thin spot. It is bending where I want and expected it to bend most. Okay. But I put the clamps off to the side and have some little spacer blocks in here to try and get it to bend just a little bit more evenly. Now I am going to remove this clamp because I want the pressure more on that edge. So I want that edge, this is the leading edge, and I want that to tip down. And where I had it there was kind of making it tip up a little bit. So there's our bend, there's our clamps. Now we're just going to carefully, because that one is kind of wanting to rock off a little bit. That's fine, it will hold well enough. I'm just going to carefully put this in a corner where it can cool down and dry off for a day, and then we'll see how it throws again. I wanted to give this guy a quick toss here. We did that steam bend, clamped it up, all good. Now when I did that in this tip, I overbent it a little bit, expecting it to rebound, and it rebounded to almost dead flat right across there. Okay? So here, I overbent it a little bit, expecting it to rebound to pretty close to flat, and it didn't at all. It kept 100% of that bend. So there's always a little bit of guess and check with this, right? It's a process, not a formula. So I just brought this stick here to kind of show you better. This is basically dead flat. This piece is basically dead flat. But if I just kind of position this so you can see it, hopefully that'll show up reasonably well. When I'm holding this lower flat, you can see I can get 2 fingers easily in between the top and the board. Okay. Now on a shorter stick, that might be fine. But on this one, I've tossed this a couple times since I did that bend, and it's lost most of its stability. This is a very stable design in general, but it definitely has way too much lift. So I'm going to give this a couple of good tosses just out there into the field, and we'll see what we can see. Okay, there you kind of saw it went flat and it kind of jumped up really quick. That's too much lift. About 1 chain or so of throw distance, which isn't terrible, but still, right? If it's going flat and then jumps up, first off, it's going away from the game you're trying to target. It's a hunting tool, right? You're trying to get it to a bird or a bunny or something. So you don't want it to dodge up away from your game. But also you lose a lot of distance because that wastes energy flying up against gravity. Let's give it a couple more tosses. Yeah, just veering and unstable. Let's do a third here. Same sort of thing, right? Flat a little bit and then shooting way up and then stalling out and dropping, right? Just not good aerodynamics. These rabbit sticks make a sound when they fly. And when they're properly tuned at their maximum speed, the maximum speed, distance, flight path that you're going to get with a certain stick, they all have about the same sound. If it's really, really loud, you have too much drag. And with one like this, where there's some instability in its flight, that sound will kind of oscillate a little bit. It's never going to pick up on the camera. You have to be here in person to hear it, right? There's some things I can't give you through this medium, right? But if you don't hear anything at all, it's a sign of low wing speed, which is a huge amount of air resistance. If it's too loud, it's a little bit too much air resistance. And if it's wobbly, then it's kitty cat's playing with wobbly, and the camera means our kitty cat came over and is playing with the camera again. It's his game. But if it's wobbly, if that sound is wobbly and uneven, it can tell you that there's some instability in the flight. So that's a clue to your tuning, which goes beyond anything that I can't even really describe it, right? I'm trying to say with words some of the details that I'm seeing and hearing, but you're not going to pick up and film. But there's some things you just have to do in person. So I'm going to go out and fetch that again, and I'm going to re-steam it and flatten it, since I know it's not going to kitty cat. Since I know it's not going to rebound at all, I'm just going to pull it to a perfect dead flat, clamp it up overnight, and we'll see how it works then. Now, since we've done so much steaming work on the number 7, I want to talk about this one first. So this piece has stayed flat. It's actually been a couple of weeks since I've had time to work on this. So, I mean, you could see by the growth of the hayfield over here that, you know, we're progressing in time more than just the hour spent on the project, because we've been busy these last couple of weeks. So this has stayed dead flat as it's dried the rest of the way down, which is good, okay? When I steamed the excess curve out of the bottom, the curve just relaxed right to flat, okay? I didn't even need to clamp it to pull it back to flat. I put the steam on it, picked it off the pot, and was like, oh, that's perfect. Now, I did clamp it to a board as it cooled. Not because I needed to pull it flat, but just to make sure nothing dumb happened, right? And then the tail of it was kicking up, and that was definitely creating some instability. So I put the tail of it boiling in the bucket of water, just like I did here at the hook end, and picked it up, and again it went on its own to pretty much dead straight flat. Okay, so if you recall, when I talked about cutting this with a saw and how the saw was pinching so bad, there was a lot of tension in the wood. Different layers of wood were wanting to grow in different directions and competing with each other. And when you put the steam on that, it just allowed it all to relax into a neutral position. And that happens sometimes. So that went really, really well. Now, in all of that torquing and tweaking, and this is not because I carved it this way initially, but if you look, is this in view, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look right here in this upper section, the edge is all the way against the bottom. Down here, the edge is all the way against the bottom. And here, it's up a little bit. So in manipulating this piece of wood back and forth, we have unevenness in the position of our leading edge. And when you're throwing it this way, right, this is leading edge in the front and this is leading edge at the back, okay? So if I look here, this leading edge is more even, okay? Didn't get quite as crazy. And we're going to need to address that, right? Because if you have one at, different levels of lift at different points on the edge, it's not going to help you any. But let's throw it and talk about how it's flying and see whether we need more lift or less lift, so that when we even that out, we're making the right corrections. Okay, so let's give it a toss. Okay, and it's not throwing that badly. That was the best of the couple of throws here I've done this morning. If you throw it just exactly right for what it wants to be, you get that nice flight with good speed. Even a tiniest bit of twist one way or the other, and I've seen a couple of flights that lose stability. Okay, so I'm going to tune it, removing a little bit of lift from the areas where that leading edge is right against the bottom, and pull it up so it's a little bit closer to lenticular. Okay, instead of this, right, some areas are here, which is moderate lift, some areas are here, which is heavy lift. I'm going to bring both of them to a medium condition where I have substantial lift, but I'm taking it out of the more excessive areas. So I'm going to go get that, do a little bit of work with, thank you beloved, Mr. Rasp, and then we'll give it another toss and see how we're going. So we're getting in there, we're starting to dial it in. So you can see here on this upper part, leading edge, I took out this spot where it was a little too much lift, took out this spot where it was a little too much lift, and you can still see the dirt smudge where I didn't touch it. Okay? And then the other thing I did do was I just kind of made this edge here on the handle a little bit sharper, just for some aerodynamics. Getting a little bit more distance out of it, getting a little bit more stability out of it. I'm going to do 3 throws here in succession, and we'll see what it's doing on camera. That was okay. If I'm less of a dingus. Okay, so you can see those were definitely better throws. Now, that tall grass up there is about 45 or so yards away, okay? It's not, that's, you know, half of the range that these things are capable of with the best wood, the best craftsmanship, and fully finished and fluted. But at this stage, where it's still all kinds of crazy rough, there's still some chip outs that I need to deal with, and there's still a lot more we can do, you know, in tuning and finishing. 45 yards at this stage with a pretty stable flight is nothing to sneeze at. What I don't like is, you can see kind of at the end, it's going, you know, straight and then kind of curving at the end a little bit, so it's starting to veer, right? So yes, that's definitely telling me I cannot put any more lift into this stick. I can get more distance with finishing, smoothing, fluting, and painting, but I can't get more lift, okay? What I can do, there are a couple of tweaks I can do, and the thing that helps with veering is if you cut out the bottom of the trailing edges, okay? So if I look at the trailing edges, this is trailing edge, and I can cut out a little bit of the bottom here yet, but not too much, because that's pretty much, I don't have much wiggle room here. But right here, this is trailing edge. I'm not sure how well it's going to pick up.
Yeah.
But this is right at the bottom. So I can scoop out some of the bottom right here, and maybe that will help with the veering problem. The other thing I can do is, these limbs are as thin as I dare make them, you know, and still have a usable stick. But this handle still has some meat to it. So I can cut out a little bit of the meat here, and that will just help with drag, right? Smaller cross-sectional area equals better ballistic coefficient, right? So reducing the cross-sectional area right here will help with drag, and digging some of this out might help with the veering. I'm going to do those 2 little tweaks, and then we'll throw it again. So you can see the fresh wood where I filed on here and on the back to thin that down from both sides. And I've made this edge a little bit sharper. Now I'm not going to make that super crazy sharp, because I have to be able to grip it and use it as a tool. And wherever it is, I'll take some sandpaper in my hand and ease it a little bit. Does that cost distance? Yes. If you look at Australian rabbit sticks, they all have that sharp edge all the way down for maximum distance. If you look at Hopi rabbit sticks, they're all fully rounded off, even more than I am doing this here, right? And there's a difference in expectation there, a difference in, you know, how far you can actually see and hit game, because grass stops these things, right? So your maximum effective range at hitting a rabbit is limited by the first clump of tall grass or brush between you and that rabbit, right? So when you have a large, wide open desert, you get really big sticks with sharp edges all the way around, and where you're in slightly more enclosed areas, you get more modifications for comfort of the human hand at the cost of some distance. And when you see people hunting with rabbit sticks in a truly forested environment, it's not these, it's a club, right? So the environment matters. I did take this out. I didn't bring this edge all the way to the center line, but I brought it up even. It was dipped way low here, and I brought it up to match the topography at the base of the hook and the base of the arm, okay? So let's see how this throws. That's pretty good. Much straighter. Let's try another one. Now, the other thing about my distance here with that 45 yards I was talking about is that I'm throwing in to a slight uphill, okay? When I turn around, face the wood line below me and throw to where the camera is, I usually gain 10 yards because then I'm throwing down a hill. So that's an impact on this too. I'm set up this way deliberately because I don't want to, when I'm tuning, I don't know exactly how it's going to throw, and I don't want to hit it with trees. So it is a willful handicap, but I wanted to mention that when you're comparing my little throwing range here to other people's. Very straight. Nice. So that's nice. Still a tiny bit of veering. I'm going to take, there's another little 1-inch section just right where my two fingers are. I'm going to take the bottom off a little bit, and we'll do a couple final throws. And I think we're pretty close to tuned on this. So I did just a little bit more work there, and I smoothed out a little burr that was here on the top that could have been causing a little bit of drag. And I think this is pretty much at the anything else I do is more likely to hinder than help stage, okay? So we're pretty close to a finished tune. Let me chuck it a time or two. You can see that nice, dead straight, very stable, very flat. That's a proper tune. One more just because. It's fun to throw it. Flubbed it a little bit, threw a little bit too much down into the hill. But, again, you can see, very stable, very flat, dead straight, okay? That's what you want. That's what you're really tuning for when you're trying to make a hunting implement. It's not a competition for distance, right? It's not, there's a temptation to think, well, if I give it a little more lift, maybe I can get an extra 5 yards out of it. Well, maybe you can, but that's going to come at a cost. Either it's going to rise up, it's going to veer off, it's going to soar, it's going to do something that makes it a less effective hunting tool. So what you're really trying to do is to have the flattest, straightest possible trajectory. Once you've achieved that, you have made you have the best game getter that stick is capable of providing, okay? And again, different sizes, shapes, designs, and materials, especially materials. I wouldn't have that much distance if this was pine, okay? And I would have more distance with the same design if it was live oak, and I would have even more distance with exactly the same design if it was mulga wood, okay? Material matters. You're not going to get exactly the same performance from every stick. So when you're tuning, tune for that dead flat, dead straight, no veering off, no soaring, no doing anything which takes it away from your intended trajectory. Now, we were working on this other little guy. Let's throw, it's pretty close. I took down the thickness again as much as I really dare. Let's see how this is throwing. And again, the same thing. When I look at that flight, all I did from the last time, I know I haven't done that much with that one because it was a pretty easy tune. Sometimes it goes easy, you get pretty darn close on your first shot, and you think, boy, that's awesome, and then other times you're fussing with it and steam bending 5 different times and then still coming out here and doing a lot of stuff, right? So sometimes it's real easy, sometimes it's real hard. That one, it's real easy. And again, if you watch that flight, absolutely dead flat, dead straight. Could I enhance the airfoil and maybe get a little bit more distance? Yeah, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave well enough alone and take it to the finishing steps. Couple of thoughts before we go to the next stage of this video. First is, these are the only 2 tools I've used out here in the field. The Shinto rasp, which is my favorite for bulk removal with this sort of work, and then a coarse double cut large half round file, okay? And that large half round is better for getting into concavities, right? So when you try to use this on a concavity, it tends to hit the edges preferentially and then carve grooves, okay? So a really wide arc, yes, you can still get it, and as long as you keep it moving, it won't dig in like that, but the tighter and the tighter arc, the harder that is to do, and something like this just works better. So those are my 2 workhorses for this sort of thing. Now, this was very complicated to tune, and this was a no-brainer. I just thinned it down until it spun at the right speed, okay? The reason that this was a no-brainer is because I already have one out of the same, literally same exact stick, okay? So this is the other half of the big root that I used to carve the boomerang or the rabbit stick that we did in the previous rabbit stick series. So it has a twin, so when I was making this, I know it's twin work, so I just made it to basically the same specs and same profile, and it came out with pretty darn close, just a little bit of tweaking, and it was good, right? There's another half to this root. I think we should make another one of these. We'll see if it's easy to tune or difficult to tune, but this one is going to go to the finishing work, as is that one. It's going to get sanded. The top's going to get fluted. I'm going to do that off camera because we already have video content on that, and there's not really much to add here, other than I will talk about the fluting pattern. I'm going to leave the handle as gauged by the height of my hand unfluted, okay? And then the flutes will follow this inside edge, okay, around here, and then once that gets to the back, the extra space will just be filled with concentric half moons. Okay, so that's the fluting pattern I'm going to do on this. There's a couple of little checks that I had mentioned. They're not critical, they're not threatening the structural integrity of this, but I'm going to fill them up with a little bit of something, a little epoxy, a little super glue, and sawdust or something, just so that that's just drag, right, for smoothness. I'm doing that for drag, not for structure. If I didn't have that, if I was lost in the woods and made this, I wouldn't care, right? But I have it, so I might as well make the absolute best product that I'm capable of, so I'll fill that with something. The fluting is finished, the back is sanded. Let's test this. Before I give it a chuck here, I do want to mention that there was a bit of deformation here in this long section from removing material on the top. That's common. When you have to steam bend these, you get everything just the way you want it, you start sanding, you start doing the finishing work, and often you end up needing to re-steam bend it. I did that, I just brought it back to flat, so the whole back is in the same plane. There's a tiny kick down here, there's a little bit of lift here, but globally, it's all in the same plane. So it actually warped quite a bit from carving the flutes in. Let's give it a toss and see how it's working. Pretty nice. We'll try her again, a second toss. A little low. That toss was a little bit low, but that's what you would actually be doing for a hunting toss. And it's nice and dead straight there. I'm going to try and throw it high for a little bit of distance just to see what I can get, because I am throwing into into an uphill here. Okay, so that was somewhere, not super accurately pacing, but somewhere 45, 50 yards. So that was pretty nice. One of the reasons I do throw and tune these here is specifically because I'm throwing into an uphill so that the ground catches them. I don't want to have a really long errant throw going into the trees back behind there, because throwing stick versus tree wins every time. The only thing I might say is that it is a little on the heavy side for a throw stick. It definitely is. It's not bad. It's good. It's got good impact. On one of my test throws, I put it through one of these little trees that you saw here, and it cut off a spruce branch about the size of my pinky like it was pruning shears. So in terms of usefulness as a hunting tool, it's really where it needs to be. So I'm going to let this go with that. It's going to dry out, get completely dry, because I did steam bend this yesterday to get it back to flat. I'm going to make sure it's absolutely dead dry. I'm going to do some 220 grit sanding on it. I'm going to fill in a couple of voids. Now, I don't care about, right like this, where there's a little bit of tear out right there. I don't care. However, here and there's two little voids that has some sharp angles on them, and that can catch air and cause drag. So I will fill those up with whatever filler happens to be handy when I go to do it. It's not structural, it's just a little cosmetic thing. So making sure it's dry, a little bit of cosmetic work. I almost could put a little bit more lift into it, but every time I had more lift into it, I got a lot of veering. So I think it's well enough alone, and we're calling this one done. Now I do have the rest of the blank, so we're going to make and tune a couple more here. I could just go and chop the second blank out of this piece, but it's such a nice blank, and there's a lot of extra material there. I'm going to try and do what I can with sawing to see if there's a chance of getting two blanks out of it. I'm going to be careful. I hewed the back as flat as I could without, getting to the point where I was going to jeopardize the blanks. And I have it screwed and shimmed, screwed to this cant here, right there, and shimmed to be as flat as humanly possible. And I'm going to see if I can't saw out two blanks. Might work, might not. I know we'll get one for sure. And I'm definitely going to stop short of any action which would jeopardize getting one good blank, right? You don't want to destroy two trying to get two and lose the one that you have. So we'll see how this goes. To make this work, I am, however, going to use the oldest, most traditional, most low-tech tool that we have available here at Old Ways Rising Farm. That worked really happily. You can see we made our cut. This is a 1/2 inch, strong 1/2 inch thick. This is at least a 1/2 inch everywhere. The only place, it's really hard to get something like this dead flat. It's getting a little thin here, but most of this whole mass gets cut off, right? The kind of meeting point is about there. So the only place that was about to run out is a place that doesn't really matter that it was about to run out. Now, you might have noticed I stopped cutting right here because there was a screw right here holding it down. So I didn't want to cut through the screw with that very nice expensive blade. So I'm going to take the existing boomerang, trace it, okay, cut off all of the waste, cut off everything here, finish that cut with a handsaw, and then we'll talk about starting to tune one of these from a board. Here's the first of our blanks. Now, I did just finish off that cut just this much, right, with a handsaw. Now, it's really nice to have access to that really, really wonderful tool that I showed you in the previous clip. You don't need a sawmill to make a boomerang. However, I would never have gotten 2 useful blanks out of this without it. So it's one of those things, could I have made 1 boomerang with any technology? Yes. With a combination of sawing and splitting, I got 2. With a power tool, I got 3. Okay, so it's blanks like this are hard enough to find. I want to get every last bit of usable material I can, so I will make use of all of the tools that I have. You don't absolutely need all of those tools, though. So, the next thing we need to do is to rough out this blank. Now, this is really easy with already having a working prototype, because I can just kind of trace around here and have a pretty good idea where the next stick is going to be. Now notice it doesn't line up exactly, right? This is overhanging that a little bit. This is protruding a little bit, but this will give me a pretty good starting sense of where the stick will be, and I will just shift it around a little bit, kind of make it fit. Get the length. So there's a rough idea. Now, the next step on this will be just to take a hatchet and slowly work in and chop to something which looks sort of kind of like those lines. Let's look at the other blank. Now this one had the wonky stuff in it. So down here at the bottom, you can see there's a lot of extra thickness. And here all at the way top, it got a little thin. Globally, it's a good usable thickness, and I should absolutely be able to get a throwing stick out of this. But on this one, I'm going to kind of try and cheat low. So if I line up the end of my beak here, like that, I have the hiccups while I'm doing this. I don't know if that's picking up on camera or not, but it's annoying me. So there is another rough outline. If it's a little thin right there, that's not devastating. And again, we will take the hatchet and we will chop to, cut these off to length, chop this to an approximation of its final form, and then refine with draw knife. These blanks are pretty much identical. Okay, there's some minor differences in them, but they're pretty much identical because they're all coming from the same crook. You don't so much, this is one of those projects where, I've said this before and I just want to reiterate it. You don't get a piece of wood and then decide what design to make it. The piece of wood and the shape it's in is the design, right? You are following the material when you do this project. The only point at which you get to make some design choices is choosing what piece of material to pick up, right? That's your choice. Once you've chosen your material, everything else is the material's choice more than yours. So I want to start working these down. This is the one that has, kind of the gnarlier bits on it and has some of the remnants of that original split surface. There's plenty of material here. I want the majority of it to be about a 1/2 inch thick. That's the thinnest spot right there, and it's 3/8. Then here in the middle, where there's a little bit of tear out, that's an even half right there. Okay, even right in the middle of that tear out. Couple of spots where it drops a 1/16 below a half right there in that one little bit. It's 3/8. So there'll be a little bit of undulation on the bottom side, but that's not a big deal. Here in the thicker spots, that's 3/4, and here at the handle, that's 3/4. Okay, so we're going to work this all down to a 1/2 inch eventually. And since the top is pretty much dead flat because that's the bandsaw cut right along there, okay, I'm going to work off of this face. Since I wanted a 1/2 inch, I'm going to make a mark that will be the center line of the finished piece, and that's going to be a 1/4 inch. Okay, so I have my 1/4 inch mark. I can transfer it just by finger gauging here all the way along. Okay, do the same on the back. I often lose, flipping something around like this, I tend to kind of lose my finger gauge a little bit, so I'll just put another mark on it here. Splitter in the way. There we go. Okay. So that line will be the middle of the finished piece. Now, I've talked about this before in previous videos, but on the leading edge, right, so here, this is leading there. This is leading here, okay? Just rotating this way, right? And then this is trailing, and this is trailing, okay? So on the leading edge, I'm going to start cutting down from the top with the rasp, and I'm going to take off the line so I end up a little bit, so that the edge, the sharp edge ends up a little bit below the true center line. And then on the trailing edge, it's the reverse. The waste I'm going to remove first is the material on the bottom, and again, I'm going to take off that line. Since there's some undulation here, I'm going to keep an eye to making that even above and below that line as well. When you're removing large amounts of material with a rasp, it's easier to take off the corners first anyway. So instead of trying to carve this absolutely dead flat, and fight it and make that a flat plane surface, I'm just going to start the shaping process and even it out as I go, maintaining the top, and wherever I need to remove meat, taking it off of the bottom. That will be my first guess. I'm going to do that, get it all nice and even. These are flat, so there should not need to be any steam bending in this one or the other one there. And we will go back out in the field when it's roughed out and time to start looking at our first tuning throws. Let's have a look-see at these sticks. They are all roughed out the way that I've showed, in this and other videos, marking that center line and then cutting the line off from certain directions where I want to favor one edge or the other. But I haven't done any other tuning on that. I did want to show you, these finished roughed out blanks that, they came out very nice. They're very similar in size. They'll make a nice set to throw together when they're all finished. The only thing I'm going to say about the finished one that we've already done is, I'm not sure how well it'll pick up, but when I bend it back flat, that bend has taken very, very well, and it's been a couple of weeks of drying. So if it was going to shift at all, it would have done so already. This is the blank that had a little bit of tear out in it from that initial splitting operation, making the first one. Okay, but I'm not too worried about those. We'll just, in the finished piece, we'll smooth that all off. There was plenty of material here. Looking at this one, I like to look at these and ask myself, where do I think we'll need to remove some material? My suspicion is this is still really, really thick right here. So we might need to take some stuff out of this area, but I think the foils look pretty good. This is the one that was sawn the whole way. I was a little bit worried right here in the handle because there was so much bark and I didn't know how deep that was going to go. The handle section on this is a little bit more narrow than the other two, but that shouldn't really affect anything, and it's plenty thick enough to be every bit as strong as it needs to be for this project. So this one, because it was sawn all the way, is a very, very consistent thickness, and I really don't want to take any more off in thickness or it's going to end up getting too light, not have enough momentum, weak spots, right, etc. All the things that can come with having too thin of a blade. So I'm going to throw the one that's finished first as a comparison, and then we'll throw these, and I'll talk about what sort of things I'm going to be thinking as I tune these two. So let's throw the finished one first. Nice long flight. Again, remember when you're watching me throw these, I'm throwing them into an uphill. So I either have to incline them a little bit so that they go with the ground. If I throw them dead flat, they're all going to hit the ground pretty much right in front of me. But I'm doing this here deliberately because I don't want them to end up in the trees and getting broken. Right? So when I'm tuning them and I don't know exactly how they're going to perform, I like doing this into an incline like that, a gentle incline, because it's a natural backstop. Now let's throw, the next one I'm going to throw is the one that I think has some thick spots and that has that tear out in the bottom. Let's look at its behavior. It's actually pretty good. That one I'm going to thin before I do anything else. It just wasn't, it wasn't getting the velocity up. Didn't seem like it was cutting the air really well, but the flight was overall pretty good. It was straight and flat, okay? So I'm guessing on that one that just thinning the limbs down a little bit until they're ½ inch or a little bit under all the way across all surfaces will probably just get me a little bit more airspeed and a little bit of a longer glide. So that'll be my first step on that one. Let's try the one that's as thin as it dare be. And then here we're just going to be looking at what the airfoils are like. That one needs a little bit more lift. So let me go get them, and then I'll draw on some pencil where I'm going to shave with these. So both of these flew about 2 chains into an incline. So they're already getting a pretty good distance. I think there's some tweaks that we can make. First off, there's no sanding done. So just sanding it and doing the fluting is going to get us more distance, right? Just that in and of itself. I think there are a couple of tweaks that we can make to these. So the one... This is the second one that I threw, slightly narrow handle, already as thin as we really dare make it. What I want to do with this one is I'm looking at the handle, and there's kind of a protrusion here. If I cut in the bottom on the very tips, that gives it just a little bit more lift. And since there's a down protrusion right there, okay, is that showing up where I marked the pencil? Right here. Okay. That will, bringing that off will probably help aerodynamics a little bit. And then here, right in the leading edge and on the end, if I cut a little bit of material out of there, that should give it a little bit right here, filing on the bottom of the leading edge right here on the end, should give the tip just a little bit of upsweep in that area. They're doing so good, I'm only going to make very, very small changes, because you can go too far and then end up with all kinds of soaring and veering problems. And if you get it absolutely 100% to its maximum before you do the sanding and fluting, sometimes after you sand and flute, you will find that you've created soaring and veering problems because you're getting more wing speed. Okay, so I'm only going to make some small modifications. In this one, a little bit on the bottom of both tips, just for a little hint of more lift. And then this is the first one that I threw with a little bit of gouging in the bottom. And as I'm looking at this wing, there's a big, it probably won't show up in camera, but there's a big, massive thick spot right there. Okay, so I'm going to shave this from the bottom until it's a 1/2 inch thick there. Then looking along this, there's a little bit of a thick spot right here. Right there. Again, I'll shave that area till it's a measured 1/2 inch. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Take a little bit out of the bottom of the handle right there. Okay, so I'm going to do all that off camera, but I'm just going to do a little bit of rasp work where I made those marks that I showed you, and then we'll show throwing it again. We have made our modifications. Now I'm just going to go right into giving these guys a chuck. So again, we will start with the completely finished and fluted one for, you know, sort of a baseline flight. Okay. Which one's next? This one wants to go next. This is the example that had the tear out in it. Okay. So we'll give this one a chuck. Okay. That one's still struggling to get enough lift. And then the one that was made from the dead flat board with the slightly small handle. I'll try that one again. That one might almost have too much lift, but I want to go for another throw because I kind of flipped my hand a little bit while throwing it. Okay. Don't you love it when practice makes it all worse every time you throw?
Deep breath, my love.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so these two, the one with a little bit of tear out and the original, are really, really similar in performance, even with this one not being fluted yet. So we're going to mostly not mess with a good thing. Okay, this one seems to be doing really, really well. And this is the one that I reduced in thickness, but didn't change the foils really much at all. The only thing I see that I might tweak just the smallest amount is when I'm looking at the edges, there's a little bit of kind of wooginess, so I might just smooth out a bit. Just sandpaper, right? Not any big material removal. Just a little bit of sandpaper, kind of truing those up a little bit, so that the transitions from where it's leading edge to where it's trailing edge are a little smoother. But that's doing so well, I don't want to mess up a good thing. This one, I think, is just a little bit there's a balance issue in here somewhere. So it's got just a little bit too much lift, I think. And what I'm going to do, so this is the bottom, this is the top, is I'm going to take a little bit of material off of this bottom leading edge, okay, right in there, just to raise that a little bit, which will decrease the lift right in that area slightly. Also on this, if you compare these, you can see the head of the new one is a whole lot bigger. Let me just mark that with a line here. Is a whole lot bigger than the head of the original. And this one, when I was throwing it there, I cut out some because I flubbed a half a dozen throws in a row, just because it was kind of wanting to turn sideways on me. So I think there might be a little bit of a weight distribution issue in here. So this one I'm going to actually do a fair amount of work on. I'm going to remove this material, take a little bit of weight out of it, okay, and true up this leading edge a smidge, and then we'll see how that one works. This one, I'm just going to sand up, clean up. Those alterations have been made, so you can see here, instead of that, big, long, exaggerated point, which is right about where my finger was, and that excess material on top, I took it down so that it's just about exactly the same as the other two, okay? Just doing that, removing that mass from the edges, and then also you take off a lot of mass in the rounding process, right? So then after cutting that much material off, then I'm rebuilding that airfoil profile. And just those two things made it fly a whole lot better. I chucked it a couple of times. It was much, much more stable. And then I did decide to raise the median edge a little bit. There was a little bit of flop in it yet. So just to take a little bit of lift out of it, this edge here is sitting right on the center line of the piece. Okay, right? So it's a true lenticular form going into there. So the only lift is what's going to be generated as this dives down and lifts that wingtip up. And that is one thing that I've noticed with these number 7 designs, is that they want to be closer to lenticular than some other designs. And I suspect that that's why there's just so much back weighting from this projection, this hook projection, that they tip up a little bit faster. So I've seen in a number of throws with a couple of these, that they'll be stable right out and then very quickly destabilize in the flight from that tip. So a little less initial lift has been good for this design. So let's give them a chuck. This is the one that I really haven't done anything else to, with the little bit of tear out in the bottom. Not much has been done to this since before. I did even a couple things out, but kind of a bit of a flub throw, but we'll do it again. And then here's the one I just modified. Okay. Still has a little bit too much lift in there. Let's toss it. Okay, let's try to not have a flub throw on this one, the one that hasn't been modified. And I'm still messing that up. And the one that I just modified. Those are both stable and dead flat, but didn't go far because, again, dead flat into an uphill doesn't go very far. Okay. Throwing them up like that, yeah. Definitely I think there's a little bit too much lift on the one that I'm still working on. Let me modify that again, and we'll be right back with a couple more throws. Okay, now I actually decided to take a little bit of the lift out of both of these. So here, the forward leading edge, that edge is pretty much right on the center line of both sticks. And the other treatment that I gave to both of these is I filed a little bit on the bottom of this little beak projection, just to take a little bit of weight out so it's not tipping over quite as quickly. So let's give them a toss. That was obviously like thrown high so that we could get some distance on it, right? But it was stable the whole way, so that's good. And then this one, better throw, and also stable the whole way. So for now, that is all the tuning work that I'm going to do on those. We have 3 sticks. Now, this one, the first one is all the way sanded to 220 and fluted. These other 2 I have not fluted yet. I did sand them. I was just trying to get this video done, so I did a little power sanding. So they are sanded well enough to know how they're going to throw. They will both get a little bit of finish sanding. I haven't totally decided if I'm going to flute these or if I'm just going to leave them with a smooth surface. Part of me wants to take them all the way to finished and painted. Part of me wants to keep at least one of them for a teaching piece to show the grain direction and how the grain follows the entire length of the stick. And I've changed my mind about 3 times a day for the last week. So for now, we're going to throw them unfluted. And they're both throwing very, very nicely in that capacity already. Now, before I give these a chuck, I just want to mention quickly that this is an unsponsored, unmonetized YouTube channel. We put a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of materials into these videos, and that's coming out of pocket because it's unsponsored, unmonetized. We have a Patreon, and I'm very grateful for all of the folks that are over there helping to support these efforts. And if you would like to join them, there's a boatload of digital resources. It's in the Patreon store. If you just want to go and buy something from there, you can. But if you join at any of the paid tiers, then you can get full free access to that repository. And one of the sources in there particularly pertains to this video. There is a compilation of historic references to boomerangs and atlatls, all recompiled, indexed by topic. And what I've done is gone through all of these long tomes, which are just collections of notes on certain cultures, and pulled out the specific references to specific topics. Woodworking, hunting sticks and throw sticks, wood carving, bone tools, right? Just going through topic by topic. And I've got leather tanning. The next one that I'm going to be putting up is fur tanning, working with fur skins. And I've got about a dozen of them in the works and quite a few up already. But as I work with those, I'm re-editing them so all of the text is typed text so that it will print nicely. You're not just trying to print a scan of a book page. And the scanned pictures, I'm re-editing and cleaning up to the best of my ability so that they print nicely as well. And then each of those documents has just a linear document that you can put into like a page reader or print page at a time. And there's also a version organized into signatures that are already formatted for pamphlet folding if you want to make your own bound copies of these works. So there's so much information there, I can't tell you what's all there in this short period of time. Go check it out, and I'm so grateful when you do. Let's throw some sticks. So I'll chuck the fully fluted one first. Okay. Then the 2 that are just sanded. Actually went a little bit farther than the fully fluted one. Nice straight flight. Okay, so those were averaging in about 50-yard throws on a dead flat. So far, the best throws that I've had with these are 65 to 70 yards, but that was with a little bit of a downhill, throwing downhill. So let's give them another chuck, see what we can do. This one is not fluted. That was a little bit low. Not fluted, number 2. A little bit high, but a really nice throw. Do you see how that just stuck right in the ground? That's that tendency of this hook to tip down. You can see it sticking right there. Then the fluted one. Nice. Okay, so those again, about the same range, 45 to 50 yard. I'm just measuring this by pacing, so it's not super accurate. But it doesn't need to be. That's very good hunting range performance. Right, you're not going to be, you might try to get it into a flock of birds from longer range than that, but you're not going to be trying to take out an individual target at that full range, let alone any longer than that. However, we want to just have some fun with these, so I'm going to reposition the camera, and let's throw a couple just straight downhill and just see what we can get them to max out at. So let's throw these downhill. Now this is not a big slope. This is just a few percent slope. But that little bit of down drop does actually make a fairly substantial difference. That's also why when I'm tuning them, I like to throw into this, into the uphill so that they don't get carried away and end up, way back in the woods where I don't want them. It does make a substantial difference. Let's give them a toss. This one is not fluted. Nice, almost to the edge. And I am throwing up this time just for, let's see what the maximum distance is. That was more of a hunting throw, a little low. This one's the fluted one. Kind of whiffed that a little bit, but I'm going to go pace off to that farthest one. So the longest flight on those was just under 80 yards. Paced out to about 77 by pace count. So pacing is obviously not as accurate as stretching a tape, but good enough for knowing how well we're doing. The other two were about 2/3 as far. So, the 60-yard range, give or take a bit. I didn't pace off to each of those individually. So we have 3 successful hunting sticks. Now notice that I'm not just trying to put more and more and more and more airfoil to just try and get longer and longer and longer distance. That's not how you want to tune one of these. It's not about trying to get the absolute maximum distance, because that's not what matters. What matters is the longest distance that's flat and straight. So you noticed when I'm throwing high, or if I have a little bit too much of a, sloped inclination on the release, they'll kind of go up and curve. That's okay as long as it's not happening all the time. That's kind of a throwing error. The throwing high for distance is not how you would throw when you're hunting, right? So it's okay if there's a little bit of veering and soaring when you're doing that. That doesn't bother me. But what I care more about are the first pair of throws where I'm throwing flat and level, and I want to make sure that as far as I can throw, that it's going to go flat and level. That's the key thing that I'm looking at when I'm tuning them. And then if there's any more range, past 40 yards, any range you get past 40 yards is bonus range. Right, because 40 yards is about the limit to what you're going to be able to see a rabbit and throw a stick at it, So anything after that is a bonus. Anything after that, and if you get a little bit of a bonus, if you could hit a flock of birds out farther than that, great, good on you, good on the stick. But after 40 yards, we're talking bonus range. So when I'm tuning, I'm focusing more on flat and straight in that first 40 yards, than on trying to get an extra 1 or 2 yards in a maximum distance lucky throw. Okay? Because it's not really useful. It's not going to do anything for you. So I am very, very happy with these, and I'm very, very happy with having a couple of this style, right? Because they are so useful in terms of being, like reach up, grab a branch, pull it down, collecting nuts, collecting berries, collecting, leaves, collecting leaves, oak leaves for tanning a hide, or pine needles for making tea, right? So, like white pine needles for tea. So it's a really nice tool to be able to have, in addition to its ability to, actually get game if you're going to take it to that. I haven't hunted with these yet. I would love to find a place where it's legal and I had the opportunity to try them out, but for now I'm just studying them. So we'll see. We'll see how the future evolves, and if I can ever get a position where I'm able and allowed to take some game with these. It is something that I want to do eventually. But we have some sticks that are fun to make and play with and practice with, and a nice little tool that you can make for bushcraft. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that this whole series has been useful to you if you're interested in this technology, exploring it and using it. And most of all, I hope you'll join us here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.